All right, guys, Working Class on DeerCast. Mark and I talked about doing this series, I don't know, several episodes ago, and I've got some feedback from us talking about it, Mark, but we wanted to do the Working Class on DeerCast Turkey OG series. And this is the first installment of 4 that I think we're going to do and roll out here coming into turkey season and during turkey season. So Mark, thanks for the help in throwing this together. Appreciate that.
I am so jacked about this. We first talked about it last turkey season. You brought it up and you were like, man, we need to do a full series. And I was like, I know the guys that I'd have on if we had a series. And I mentioned Paul's name that day and some others. And I'm pretty excited about this because if you think about the guests we have lined up, they really are the OGs of the turkey industry. And each will bring something different to this series of 4.
Yeah.
There's different topics that we're going to hone in on through this series of 4. So I think by the time a listener listens to all 4, they're going to go, holy cow, that was pretty entertaining. So I'm excited about it.
Yeah, and that I'm going to learn a ton. I am not a turkey expert. I don't claim to be a turkey expert. I'm excited for this to kind of be blessed by the turkey killing gods, if you will. And I'm excited to kind of be in the mix here. And our first guest is Paul Butzke. I want to thank you for doing this, man. I appreciate you, taking the time to talk to me. And it's just incredible that I'm with 2 legends of the outdoor industry in their own ways here. So Paul, thank you for doing this, man. I really appreciate it.
Oh, Curt, my pleasure to be here, along with my buddy Mark. I mean, what can you say? It's that time of year. It's about to happen before, next few weeks or so. So the energy level is like right up there. So yeah, anytime you talk turkey, no matter what time of year, but especially this time of year, can't beat it.
Well, I think what we should probably start doing, Paul, is if I doubt anybody's unfamiliar with who you are, but to kind of give you your credibility of being on the first installment of the Turkey OG series on Working Class on DeerCast. I mean, you just got inducted in basically the Turkey Hall of Fame. You're a Grand National Turkey Calling Champion. I mean, there's so much to list there for your experience and what you've done for turkey hunting within the outdoor industry is pretty incredible.
I appreciate it, Curt. And yeah, the biggest honor I've had to date by far was being inducted to the National Turkey Federation Hall of Fame in 2020. They didn't have it last year, so they just had the induction this past week down in Nashville. But I got inducted in 2020, and the honor is, I mean, it's second to none. I mean, yes, I won the Grand National, I won the U.S. Open a number of times, and it's the thrill is unbelievable. But to be inducted in that Hall of Fame was like the coup de grace right there.
Yeah.
Well, it goes deeper than that. I mean, Paul won 3 different Grand National Championships, 6 U.S. Opens, a variety of state competitions. He literally, when you showed up, you were calling for second place if Paul was there. And I'm not joking about that. No one was more dominant in their slot within the calling history than Paul Butzke was. And he was also innovative in the type cuts he was putting in the calls. Like a lot of the designs you see in the calls, the mouth calls these days, he created those designs. And that's how he was so dominant on the stage. Back in that day, he was making a lot of the calls for Quaker Boy. He was one of the original Quaker Boy guys. He's been an OG since back in when did you first start killing turkeys? In the 70s, Paul?
70s, early 70s, yeah.
Early 70s.
Yep.
And he's killed a tractor trailer load between then and now, or at least seen that many. He doesn't kill many, but he calls them in for everybody else. And he was idle as I was getting into it. Like, he drove so many of us to be better and to try and get to that level, because you couldn't reach him. I mean, nobody could beat Paul Butzke. So he is a hero of mine, and I'm so honored that he's taken this invitation to join us.
Yeah, that's incredible to think, like, if people would show up for a competition, that they're just going for second place because you were kind of like that outstanding from everybody else. But when it comes to the cuts and stuff like that in the calls, is that stuff that you just experimented with over and over again? Or did you did you have an influence from someone to know how to do that? Or where did that all come about?
No, pretty much I had access to a lot of calls, you know what I mean? And I started off, buying mouth calls and whatnot like anybody else. But then I went to work for Quaker Boy back in the late 70s. And, I was making mouth calls, and I got a chance to cut a lot of different calls and try different styles of different things. And just kind of one thing led to another. And that's where I developed a cutter style call back around 1980. And, it's kind of blossomed from there, pretty much a cutter. And then you got, a cut with another slice off to the side. You got your V cuts, but it all basically started from that.
Gotcha. Yeah, that just seems cool. Like something that you could, back then experiment with and to separate yourself and kind of get, honed into your craft and your way like that. Just like, I kind of look at anything competition wise, there's the guys that stand out like in archery or fighting or motocross. They do something that makes them stand out. They're an innovator in their craft and kind of take it to the next level. And then everyone follows suit from there, which is good for industry in general, right? I imagine you probably just changed a ton in turkey calling and how people thought about that type of thing in the day.
And there's no doubt about it, but also, Mark doesn't mention, Mark was such an icon and an innovator and all this stuff, and a champion caller and all this as well. I mean, things that he developed, through mad calls and whatnot. And it is today, a lot of people just still follow all that. And believe me, we're buddies and we're like that, but he's just up there and should be in the Hall of Fame before too long himself.
I just enjoy seeing you do it, Paul, in all honesty. Like I said, he was a hero of mine, and it catapulted him into the industry, and to this day, still in the industry with everyone at GSM, Muddy, Hawk, Avian Decoys, HS. He's a sales manager for them. So it's pretty exciting to get to work alongside of him, to get to hunt next with him each and every spring. We've been doing this hunt annually for quite a while, and we just have an absolute blast when he comes in. So I'm anxious to pick that brain and find out what he knows about tough turkeys today. That's the subject matter.
Yeah, that's what we're getting to. But real quick, let me say one thing. It's refreshing watching you guys. I'm not calling you old, but you guys have been in the game a long time. So it's cool for me to see it, to know that like your passion is never sizzled out over time, because, I think that's expected with a lot of things that people are interested into. They just kind of fall out of it or whatever. And I don't see myself falling out of it at all. So it's nice to see you guys so hardcore at it and still remaining hardcore after it. So it's cool for a young gun to see. But anyway, I guess if I can call myself,
I gotta say one more thing. I want to say one thing before we get into the other stuff. But last year in my induction into the Hall of Fame, I had to make a speech and all that. And the last thing I had mentioned about me and Mark hunting together for so many years now, and when we kill a turkey or we get a turkey and we get up there and we hug, high five, that has not lost 1 inch through the 50 years I've been turkey hunting. I'm just excited now as I was back then. And that's a passion, and that's something that it says something about the sport in itself. The adrenaline rush, the excitement, the camaraderie, being with somebody, like Mark and or a little kid even that you take out there. I mean, you don't lose that one bit.
Hell, in fact, we're getting worse as we age. Like we get so nervous, want to gobble, and we'll all dive down, or we can't get the gun on them. I mean, or we'll miss one. I said we collectively said it, but we get so nervous, Curt, when we're out there together. It's a thrill to be able to still do it, because you go through and you evolve as a turkey hunter, and everybody listening to this will relate to this. Like as you age, when you first get going, you think, man, my first bird, my third bird, my 20th bird. And now at mine and Paul's age, we're like, is that going to be my last bird? So we cherish every moment these days, I can promise you.
You have to now, especially with how crazy life can get. So let's talk stubborn birds, tough birds, Paul. I mean, there's a lot of things in turkey season, especially in the Midwest, I mean, tough hunting scenarios in general. And let's start with one. Let's start with like a weather scenario, because a lot of times it can be rainy or not ideal. And I don't have a ton of experience in hunting birds, and we'll just go with the rain or like a thunderstorm. A lot of people might use that as an excuse to sleep in, or maybe not hit it as hard as they would have normally if it's bright and sunny and birds are chirping. What advice would you have for someone, bad weather? We'll just go with rain and thunderstorms like you get often in the spring.
Okay. First off, I've done so many seminars through the years, and I practice what I preach pretty much. And the first thing I always used to tell people, number one, you can't kill a turkey between the sheets of that bed.
Mm-hmm.
So you got to get out there in the morning, you got to hunt them. It doesn't matter what kind of weather conditions, you're not going to kill them if you're home in bed. So that number one is the most important thing. Number two, you got a lot less hunting pressure out there. If you're hunting public ground and whatnot, a lot of guys are staying home and out of that environment. But turkeys are, they'll do their thing no matter what the weather conditions are. Yeah, a nice clear spring morning or what definitely will fire up birds a lot more. But turkeys still do their thing, even in the rain and a windy weather and whatnot. So being out there, you got to be a lot more patient, I believe, because number one, you got conditions like rain and wind, and your hearing ability has cut way down, and also theirs is cut way down. So you do have to set up, I believe, a lot longer in a lot more positions that you feel that where turkeys like to be at in those weather conditions. So scouting is important, getting out there and know where turkeys are, in certain weather conditions, where they like to go to. So put yourself in those positions. That'll definitely increase your odds in those scenarios like that.
Will a turkey call or gobble less or be responsive to calls less in weather conditions like that?
It depends on the frame of mind of that bird. I mean, there's no doubt you can change the frame of mind of a turkey.
Mm-hmm.
A turkey that may not, be paying much attention to what's going on. I mean, it's the breeding season, but he's not paying a lot of attention. Maybe he's feeding along, but sometimes you get a turkey fired up, he's just as responsive and just as vocal as if it was a beautiful, clear spring morning. So
remember that?
Doing that, yeah, I remember that right there. It was snowing that morning. That was last year out in where were we? Iowa or Missouri?
Missouri. That was Missouri.
That's the snow.
Yeah, that was
a snow something else I looked over,
I mean,
yeah.
We don't get it often, and I'll set this up for Paul, but it goes to this subject. It's terrible weather. We got up that morning, and you get that cold chill inside the house, inside the camp.
Yeah.
You look outside, and there's snow coming sideways. The wind is blowing, and we were like, we only got so many days. Let's go give it a try. Maybe they'll gobble. They gobbled their butts off, didn't they, Paul? I mean, it was unreal. Luckily, I was on the gun. He was calling. And I mean, he had these birds marching from 3 or 4 different directions because all of a sudden, the gobblers are in the right mood. Those hens may not be on that foul weather day. Right. Paul fired them up. And I mean, he hammered them like any other spring scenario. And they were coming from every direction in there and ended up killing that bird live on Facebook.
That's amazing.
There's no doubt. A lot of people would have stayed home that morning. A lot of people would have stayed home.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you see snow and that's kind of the opposite of the weather you're expecting in the springtime, or it's just not the typical, spring turkey weather that you dream of or you think of anyway. Right. What would be probably the toughest weather condition, if there is one that stands out from the rest? Maybe bad weather's bad weather, but what might be like we're going to have a rough go this morning out of like anything that you could be thrown at you?
Wind to me is like my worst enemy in a turkey hunt. It cuts your hearing way down, your ability to hear, the ability for a turkey to hear you as well. So I believe a really windy day is the biggest factor for myself. I don't know, Mark, what do you think?
Agree, because it takes one of your key elements away, your ability to hear that turkey gobble back. I mean, it's so important to be able to hear drumming or hens yelping or scratching or birds gobbling. And when you eliminate that sense of yours, then it really does handcuff you. I'm like Paul, I hate windy days. I would much rather have rain or snow. And especially a north wind, a cold front coming in, especially if it's been warm for a while. That's 2 strikes. High wind is one thing, but a north wind with it is tough. I always say you kill deer on north winds during the cold fronts, you kill turkeys on south winds during a warm up. I mean, it's historically, you'll have better luck on warm fronts than you do cold fronts. But just like Paul said, you're not going to kill them if you're not out there.
Well, that brings up something. I know, Mark, you talked about it with us on the regular Working Class Bowhunter series, but it was something you brought up and we called you randomly in one of our turkey camps. And I saw you say something on like a social post or whatever, winds out of the east, birds gobble the least. Does that play into this at all?
certainly it's part of the weather factor, but I have terrible luck on east winds, particularly a northeast wind. I mean, they just don't gobble very much on that east wind. And a lot of times that east wind will accompany lower pressure. And when you get that low pressure, sometimes they just don't gobble as much.
So interesting.
No doubt. No doubt.
Yeah. Paul, do you run into that a lot too? Like, do you run by that motto?
Yes, there's no doubt. Barometric pressure plays a role in the gobbling activity. And like Mark said, those weather conditions generally construed a low pressure system. So yeah, no doubt.
Yeah, it's crazy. Just how things affect animals in general, whether you think about it or not. And I never would have even thought about that, until I heard Mark say that and brought that question up to him. So we talked about bad weather. I guess what I'm gathering from it is just get after it, because birds are still going to do what birds do. You just have to adjust your scenario a little bit to make it work for the situation.
Sure. Mark and myself are big running, we like running and gunning, covering a lot of ground. But on bad weather conditions, you have a tendency, you want to set up maybe for a longer period of time, because the ability of you hearing and them hearing you might take a little bit more for a turkey, come your way. So
yeah. And also read the situation, and that's exactly what Paul's talking about. Like, if you're sitting there calling and you're not hearing gobbling anywhere, it may just be that they're not going to gobble that day because of that inclement weather. Therefore, they could come in silent. And I think that's a rule of thumb in general, regardless of the weather. When they're not talking, we probably talk a little bit less, and our setups are much longer, not just a little bit longer, much longer, because you could be calling a bird for 400 yards away that's walking real slow, that when they're gobbling, they keep you in your position. However, when they stop gobbling, you're like, let's go get to the next one. In reality, you might be leaving a bird that's coming. So you got to give them time to play that out. And Paul's a master at this. And I've noticed this in hunting with him. Like, the morning in the snow, we expected not to hear any gobbling, but they were gobbling really well. And he immediately adjusted his calling to that and started charging them up to get them even more fired up. Maybe Paul could talk to that, about reading that gobble based on the weather and then adjusting to it.
Yeah, there's no doubt. You get a feel. I mean, with all the years of experience that we've had turkey hunting, you get a feel on how a turkey is reacting to your call. Mm-hmm. And cutting it off, or there's a big delay, and for him to gobble after you called. And these turkeys, responded pretty quick. So I got aggressive, tried to get them fired up so they got to me quicker before they got with hens off somewhere else. And it just clicked. It just really clicked. And I adjusted just by the aggressiveness of my calling.
Yeah, see, I like that too. And that's a good point, because so if the weather's bad, from my experience, because I don't have a ton of turkey experience like I would more on the deer hunting side, I would be like, well, birds aren't out here. I'm going to move around and try and find them in the bad weather and I've done that, and I'm probably making a big mistake, because like what you mentioned, Mark, is that like they could be coming silent to me and I would have no idea, because I didn't sit it out long enough, because it didn't feel like I should. So that's just showing my inexperience. So when in doubt, stick it out, really is what we can go with the bad weather a little bit.
No doubt. Yep.
Yeah.
That's it.
Another key point about rainy days, watch the fields later in the day, because once it rains, they'll oftentimes go to an open area and they'll be out there preening. And a rule of thumb we have, like, when it quits raining, we wait at least an hour to let them preen and dry off. And then we go approach them, and they'll start moving around again. But it takes about an hour after a hard rain for them to get all that rain off their back and get ready to go again. It does slow them down a bit.
One more question about the weather. Will it cause them to stay on the roost longer, say if there's a heavy rain or a heavy snow or wind, rather than what they normally would?
Depending on where you're hunting. You get down in Texas, yes.
Yeah.
They will. If you get a snowy morning, because they don't see snow. But they may stay up a little bit longer, but they'll fly down. They got to fly down. They want to feed, they want to breed, whatever they want to do. So they'll end up on the ground. Maybe a little bit later, but not much.
Nothing to really change your day on it.
No.
Okay. Love that.
That's and that's another key factor, knowing your terrain. I mean, if you're hunting your own property, you pretty much know it like the back of your hand. But when you're hunting, public ground, or you're hunting areas that you're not real familiar with, you really should be familiar or try to get out and scout that area, because, turkeys like to do their thing in certain areas. And if you know where these, certain spots are, that's another, thing in your bag of tricks that you can put yourself in the right position. and try to get in areas where you know they might head to. So knowing where they want to come from and know where they want to head to is really key to in calling positions.
Okay. One thing I want to go to from weather conditions, and I think probably one of the, and I don't know if this falls in line right after weather as far as affecting birds or how someone might approach a turkey hunt. And Mark, I don't know if you agree with this, but from my perspective, would be like hunting pressure. Whether it's neighboring hunting pressure on your piece, or you've pressured the birds, or you're on public and then they're getting pressured by other people. If you know you're going to hunt, I guess I'll start this way. If you know you're going to hunt a heavily pressured piece, what would probably be the first way you would tackle it? If you know the birds have been hunted hard or the neighbors have been after them and they've been called out a lot.
You asking me?
That was to Mark or myself?
I was asking Paul.
Yeah,
I thought there was a delay in the internet here, so I was like, all right, we're good. Whoever wants to take it, I guess. I'm just asking that question. I thought we had an internet lag. I'm like, all right.
Okay. Go ahead, Marcus. I was.
No, I think it's for you, Paul.
It's for you.
What was the question?
I love this. Hey, cheers, guys. Hunting heavily pressured birds. How would you tackle it?
Heavily pressured birds.
Pressured birds. Okay.
How do you change your tactics with heavily pressured birds?
Well, pressured birds, and I'm used to that because, hunting in the areas that I've hunted growing up in New York and Pennsylvania was pretty much all public hunting ground. So the best way to hunt pressured birds, number one, is if you're able to locate something the night before, doing some preseason scouting, or try to get a bird fired up that evening before, if you can know where he's at. So you've got a good starting point, and try to get yourself in a position, maybe 150, 175 yards from that bird, on the same level above them if you can. Try to get in there as early as you possibly can before you even start to work them. Because you don't want that bird doing a lot of gobbling that would draw another attention from another hunter and have them come walking in on you. So you try to get somewhat close to that bird in a good position before this turkey even starts gobbling in the morning. So number one, the closer you can get, the better off you'll be. But there again, depending on the foliage, depending on the time of year. So I get in there and I'll, just do my basic, do some soft calling, try to get them to gobble, know where I'm at, and hopefully get them to fly down before you try to get them fired up and call them on in. But, pressure, you got to watch, and you got to be careful of other hunters. I mean, you got to be so aware, more so than any other type of hunting situation, of other hunters sneaking in. So depending on the caller that you are, if you're a good caller, you got to be really careful, because people unfortunately do sneak in on other calls and other gobbling turkeys. So be aware of that situation as well. But try to get close, try to get set up and before you'd even call them, number one, in hunting pressure areas.
Basically just give them less room for them to move around you and do something different to another hunter or whatever.
Yeah, you want to get tight on them. You want to get tight as you possibly can.
Yeah, the decoying and calling factor on a highly pressured piece of public presents a certain level of danger that I think can get looked over a lot of times. You hear the horror stories of people getting shot and stuff like that. And, that's something to consider big, especially if you're a world champion turkey caller. You really sound like a turkey out there. But if you're me, someone's like, that's not a turkey. That's Curt over there butchering that. So
yeah, you'd be surprised. You'd be surprised. And you're absolutely right. As far as, hunting with Mark and you do that a lot more in the Midwest and out West, and what is, fanning a turkey. That would be a no-no in a high pressured area around here. Yeah. I mean, it's so effective. It really is. But there's so much of a visual aspect that other hunters walking through the woods could pick up on and unfortunately sneak in on you. But, those are very effective tools, but, not in real high pressure areas. I would not do something like that.
Okay. What about a highly pressured piece of private that you're not going to have another hunter move in on you, and maybe, say I'm hunting the piece, I put the pressure on the birds, and it's 5th season in Illinois, and I've yelped at them and done all this and tromped around, just desperately trying to get on a bird. And then finally I consult you and you come out and you're like, all right, this is how we're going to tackle this 5th season highly pressured bird on Curt's farm.
Okay. First off, I do is calling position, switch
Mhm.
calling positions. Number one, you don't want to, keep pounding the same birds or the same thing from the same spot.
Mhm.
Know your terrain, which you wouldn't know, being it's your backyard or pretty much where you're hunting. Try a different calling position. If you've hunted them several different times, you know how this bird's acting. He might gobble up there on that ridge and then kind of work his way off to the left. Well, try to position yourself in the right spot. Try to get from where he wants to come from and where he goes to. Try to set up in, certain positions like that. Try to change up your calling style a little bit, maybe just a little bit more softer calling. Try a different style call, maybe switch to a box or a little slate call or something like that. If you're a diehard mouth call, switch it up because, turkeys do kind of get to a point, if you are pounding the bird and everything happens 2 or 3, 4 days in a row the same way, the scenario changes. You want to change it up, and more you could change it up. Eliminate obstacles that are there between you and that bird. Try to get on the same level or above them if you can. Just switch it up.
Okay. Yeah, that's great advice. The turkey season goes on, I imagine more birds get henned up. And as it goes on, so would that apply also for henned up birds, or is that a completely different scenario?
No, yeah. Here's the thing with turkey hunting. Nothing is foolproof. What works 3, 4, 5 times in a row, you might spook that bird the 6th time with it, but nothing is foolproof. So always keep an open mind, and try this, you try that, you try this, and I try the same scenarios in all situations, whatever the weather condition is, whatever if he's henned up or whatnot. But when a henned up turkey, generally I get aggressive with my calling. I'll try to get a hen fired up in the bunch. Maybe get the hens talking. You get a dominant hen in that bunch to start cutting back at you or whatnot. A lot of times she's going to come in and investigate what's going on. Gobblers are very territorial in the spring of the year, but people don't realize there are some dominant hens in that bunch that are also very territorial. Certain hens that want to run with that bus gobbler, certain hens that want to be bred first. They kind of take control of that gobbler. So if you can get her fired up and aggravated enough, and through some cutting and whatnot, then she's going to come in and investigate. The gobbler might not be paying any attention to you, but he's going to follow her along. And also, number 2, you hear turkeys, and knowing your terrain, they're in this spot and they're heading to this spot. Try to position yourself, try to get in between where they want to come from and go to. And a lot of times that's what you got to do with henned up birds. Gotcha.
It takes a little more know-how in calling, and I guess a little more effort. You're trying to cut a bird off if you can't get a hen to break away.
Yeah, and listen to those hens. If you get a hen talking, that's a good thing. You get a hen, from getting her yelping and cutting and carrying on, that's a great situation to be in, because like I said, she'll get fired up enough where she might come in. A lot of times they might lead them off, but where she's going. And then you can get around and get in front of them. But a lot of times they'll turn and, try to come your direction and see what's going on over there. So
in a situation like that, when you get the hen talking, is it good to cut her off each time? Or is it good to kind of separate how often you're cutting her off? Do you let curiosity get her, or do you stay on her to keep her interest going?
I get as aggressive as I can be with her. Once she's going, because she'll try to get louder and more aggressive than you can, which she will always do.
Yeah.
But there's so many different scenarios when you get a hen cutting and fired up. Man, she's just as aggressive as you can imagine. And, a lot of times, there might even be a gobbler with her, but all of a sudden you hear a gobbler gobble, 300 yards off in the woods. Next thing you know, boy, here he comes. So, but a lot of times when they got those gobblers with them, they'll come in.
So when she's getting spicy, just keep on her. I like that.
I do. There's a lot of times when you quit calling, if you were to calm down and whatnot, they'll just kind of work their way up.
Yeah.
So keep her going.
You got a call there, Paul? You want to blow one? Just talking that hen stuff, where you're really trying to fire her up. I don't know if you got one there or not. I'm sure you do.
Yeah, I got something there, I think. A cut is more of an aggressive call, like a sharp. Dry it out. And when you're cutting, it's real aggressive, broken rhythm like this. So the more aggressive and calling like that hen, she's over there, bop, 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 and you try to get as loud and aggressive as she's getting, she's going to come in and check it out. There's no doubt about it.
We had a scenario like that last year in Iowa. We were hunting and we were on a piece of private ground and all the birds were off the private on the public. But we had a good setup on the private, but you could hear them. They were still flocked up. It was the early part of the season. And sometimes it comes down to what part of the season you're into. And we could tell the flock was still vocal. This was 2 hours after fly down or an hour and a half after fly down. The flock's still talking. They're still, in the woods, and you hear these intermittent fighting purrs, and they're still establishing their pecking order. So Butski starts to turn it on. I start to turn it on. All of a sudden, they hear these two new voices. So you never forget that either. You're a new voice to their flock. And we start charging it up. And I mean, it wasn't long. Here they came. The whole flock came. It was like 4 or 5 different longbeards and a bunch of hens. And they are just charging up through the woods, gobbling. And the hens were yelping and coming and coming. And then they got to this deep ravine and they never would come around it. And they ended up sifting on by us. But had that not been there, they'd have been in our laughs. But it was really cool to call those birds off of public onto private and almost get them killed. And we did not kill one that day, but we got close. But we did it by getting really aggressive and literally just screaming at them.
Yeah, that's fascinating to think about. I always worry that I'm going to overdo it, just not knowing enough. And then going into that, like that's another tough hunting scenario. Is like, why does a bird, and maybe there's no answer to this, maybe they're just, I don't know what it is. Like, what's up with getting hung up on a ravine or a fence post or a little creek? Like, is there any way around that, or is that just part of hunting birds? They just do it.
That's part of hunting birds. And going back to what you were saying about, not knowing when to call, when not to call it. And it's a different scenario if it was just a gobbler by himself. A gobbler by himself, you got to, sometimes you got to lay back on your call. You want him to come looking for you. You let him gobble. Sometimes you don't even answer back. You kind of play a little hard to get. In other turkeys, you can tell every call you make, that turkey's going to cut you right off. You get a feel for how a turkey's reacting to your call. Now, when a hen's fired up, like I said, I don't quit. I keep it up with that hen because she's, got to calm down and kind of walk off her direction and take them gobblers with her. But if I get a hen fired up, it's a little bit different. But a gobbler, you got to kind of, know when to call, when not to call. You get a feel for.
Yeah.
I'm going to play this. This was that scene that I was talking about. I'm sorry, Paul. This is that scene I was talking about where we were working those birds on that public ground. So here we are in public and just listen to Butski hammering these turkeys. It's only like 37 seconds, but I had to pull my phone out because I was just sitting there just loving the fact that he was hammering these public ground birds this hard. And that went on for several minutes. There's only 37 seconds of it. Yeah. But the more aggressive he got, and you hear him, he's just hammering those hens. You probably could barely hear them, but they're answering off in the distance and they're coming. He just kept pouring it on, kept pouring it on for like 10, 15 minutes. The next thing you know, the flock's right in front of us. They're just on the other side of that ravine.
That's amazing. What time of year was that?
That would have been like April the 16th, 17th, probably in Iowa.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, that's cool. That's something I'm going to keep note of because, calling at birds, I've got hens worked up, but I didn't know to stay aggressive on them like that. So that's a good tool to have in the bag or something to think about next time that happens. There's a lot about turkey communicating. A lot of people don't know. I know I'm not the only one in this boat, but I'm glad I'm learning this way. This is more fun, to talk to the guy himself and learn this stuff. But yeah, I didn't know that. And I'm sure a lot of people didn't really realize to stay on them aggressive like that when they're doing it. But, and then, if you have a solo Tom by himself, kind of flirt with them a little bit and get his curiosity, but keep them intrigued all at the same time. So,
but you heard Paul's pace there. Like hen would answer, he'd answer back. Hen would answer, he'd answer back. He wasn't just nonstop calling. And sometimes I hear hunters and I hear them and they'll get on that call and they won't stop. Paul still had a pace. He increased what he normally would do in terms of how often he called because the hen was answering. If she was a little bit less responsive, he would have slowed his pace down, but he still had a back and forth pacing to his overall calling rhythm.
Yeah, you're kind of matching her pattern, right?
You are, yeah.
Yes, definitely.
Finishing her sentences and matching her pattern pretty much is what I'm really ticking her off. Which that'd piss off any lady if we're being honest. I guess it's just how you'd aggravate your wife. You just do that to the hen and then they'll be coming your way.
Oh, I could aggravate her real easy.
Cutting her off every time she tries to make a point. So do a lot of birds, I guess for time's sake, this might be the last thing we get to, Mark, unless there's something else you want to throw in. Everyone, well, not everyone, but a lot of guys are using decoys. A lot of birds can be shy of decoys, or I guess everyone's had it where they have their decoys out and the bird sees the decoy but doesn't react to it how you thought it would. What's your take on birds that might be more decoy shy? And maybe that ties into hunting pressure. I don't know.
Go ahead, Mark. You answer that.
Okay, it does tie into hunting pressure, but I always look at it as you're going to fail a few times, and then all of a sudden the next one's going to see it and come right in. So you never know what turkey you're hunting on the other end unless you've hunted that turkey several days in a row. Now, if I'm failing with, say, a gobbler decoy, and he will not commit to it, or just in general, the mood they're in, the turkeys in general where I'm hunting aren't coming in, I'm going to switch to a hen. And in fact, oftentimes that's the only decoy I have out because you don't have a lot of adverse reactions to a hen. I love that avian, just, comfortable hen, just kind of feeding along. You don't get a lot of adverse reactions to that. It also gives you a visual aid to your calling. But there are those times where you really need a gobbler present or a gobbler decoy or a fan, because a bird, he won't come to the hen, won't come to the call. And then all of a sudden you fan him a few times and boom, he's coming to run over you. So every scenario is different. And Paul mentioned this earlier. It's like a chess match out there. And it's really having been in the situation enough where you see what the bird's doing, you recognize what he's doing, and you try to adjust your techniques accordingly. Because sometimes you're closer to success than you realize you are. Oftentimes you sit there and you go, I'm out of the game on these guys. And then the next thing you know, they're at 20 yards and about to roll you over. I don't know if Paul wants to add into that, but you got to read the scenario and try to adjust to it. But there's other times then where no decoys to ticket. Like I love decoys because I'm in open ground a lot. And if I'm hunting the woods, I don't hunt with decoys very often. I'm using the terrain to get to a position where when they pop up, they're within gun range and I kill them within cover. Right. And I'll let Paul extend on that.
No, that's absolutely correct. And, the big thing that, like we talked about in different situations and different scenarios, try to position yourself where that turkey just pops up, like you said, just over the ridge. But the big thing that I like to tell people is as much as you're turkey hunting, nothing's happening. It takes 5 minutes sometimes. All of a sudden, you could be as down and dejected as could be. You're not hearing birds, and you finally get a turkey fired up, and 5 minutes later, there he is. He's flopping on the ground in front of you. I mean, that's what turkey hunting does to us. I mean, you just never know when it could happen. Turkeys might not be gobbling at all, and the next thing you know, you get one gobbling, and 5 minutes later, you got them on the ground.
Yeah, that's the fun of it.
I think another key situation we haven't talked about, and it's one that I personally start to get a little depressed when it occurs, but it's the tail end of the season. All the good stuff is in the rearview mirror when they're flocked up at the early part of the season, and then they get henned up, and then they lose their hens and they're coming again. But what happens when all of that stuff's in the rearview mirror and the gobbler flocks are coming back together? They're not gobbling as much in the morning. They're not gobbling as late in the morning. And you really feel like that testosterone has dropped within the gobblers. Paul, what are you doing there late in the season to try and get on a turkey and kill them?
What I do is I am real aggressive. I try to get something fired up there's been so many different times where I've seen turkeys out there together that, in a field, and you're hammering them. They're not paying no attention. Yeah. Next thing you know, you keep it going. Next thing you know, you got one of them gobblers pick their head up and look your direction. And before you know it, it's kind of a race. I'm coming in to get you. And it is a low testosterone level. You get something fired up. But you also got to realize at that time of year, gobblers that may have been killed in a particular area, turkeys will travel a lot more. So a lot more gobblers might come into that particular area that's, they've lost their hens, or hens have left them, and they're still vulnerable. So they may come in an area that you're hunting that, you had already killed a gobbler in. And next thing you know, you got a new turkey that's showed up, because they cover more ground when they are still in that higher testosterone level, and they're still looking for a hen. So you never really know, but gobblers that, are kind of low level, I try to get fired up again.
I like it. I like the aggressive approach. How far, just curious, I feel like people don't talk about this a lot, or at least in my realm, how far will a bird travel? Is there a known estimate on that? Like a bird with high testosterone, he's looking for a hen. I mean, I'm sure there's no cap on it, but have you heard of any unique stories with that?
There really is no unique cap, but if you hunt out west, you hunt Merriam's, or places where you hunt Merriam turkeys, they'll come a long ways. You see a little dot sometimes off a mile away, and as long as he can hear you, I mean, that turkey's going to come your direction. I've seen them come in Montana, come over different mountains and come to us. I mean, they've heard that call because of the terrain, and yet they're still a long ways away. So they'll cover a lot of ground if they're in the right mood.
That's another reason to stay put too. You might have a bird coming that you're not aware of that's putting in a little more work than
right.
He may be answering and you don't hear him. He's so far away.
You don't hear him. Right.
They hear better than us. And it's one of the reasons, Paul was one of the original guys at Walker's Game Ear. You put those game ears on, all of a sudden there's turkeys gobbling that you don't even hear with your own ears, but sometimes they'll gobble out of hearing into hearing. But to your question, Curt, there's Dr. Michael Chamberlain. He's on all the different social media pages. He does a lot of studies and reports a lot of studies that people are doing about the range of a wild turkey, and not just in a calling scenario, how far they'll come, but in general, how far they're traveling to seek out hens. And some of these birds have gone miles in the spring to try and find receptive hens, or to try and find an area with less, pecking order pushes them around. And it might be some old gobblers here that pushes him out. He might move 3 or 4 miles over here, find an area with hens, and stay there. So there's some really cool studies on that, but he's worth the follow, Dr. Michael Chamberlain.
Yeah, I'll check that out. That's super interesting. That's always intriguing to me, whether we're talking whitetails or, I got real into the mule deer migration out in Wyoming and stuff like that. It's just fascinating what animals will do, migrating due to weather or traveling for the rut or whatever it might be. That's just always cool to think about, at least from my perspective, like where an animal can go.
Mm-hmm.
On Instagram, he is Wild Turkey Doc, all one word.
Okay. That's perfect.
Man, he's a fascinating follow.
Yeah, I always like that. It's stuff you just don't think about as much as like bird travel. I don't know. I just less thought about it, I feel like, than a whitetail traveling. So, but maybe it's just because you identify a whitetail a lot differently than you would a turkey to another turkey. So maybe that's where it stands out a little more. But awesome, man. Well, I appreciate it. I learned a lot on this episode. I hope everybody listening and watching did. Mark, what do you think?
I'm so fired up about this. I just appreciate Paul taking the time and come on with us. Like I started out saying, he's one of my all-time heroes. And if you guys like this information, you're going to continue to enjoy our other guests. We've got Rob Keck, Cuz Strickland, Steve Stoltz. I mean, we got them lined up one after another, and we're all going to be talking about different subjects. And Paul can speak to all 3 of those guys. They're as good as they come when it comes to turkey hunting.
No doubt. Just great friends, great hunters. I mean, just great people. I love them all to death. Just like I love you, Mark.
Love you too.
Believe me. I mean, we go way back, and I look forward to every spring. Just what we do. Just being able to do it. It's just rewarding.
It won't be long, buddy. I can't wait till we're out there hugging each other's neck over a miss.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for doing this, man. I really appreciate it. I might be a turkey expert by the time this whole series is over with, or at least I'll think that I am. and then it's time to really go put it to the test. We'll
Kurt,
see.
I got to tell you one other thing.
Yeah.
One other thing you want to remember, and I've been turkey hunting over 50 years, and I go into the woods and I keep an open mind. Don't ever get to the point where you feel you know it all, because you don't.
Yeah.
I've learned every time I go into the woods. I know Mark does as well. I mean, just keep an open mind and learn from your mistakes. Try this, always try that. There's scenarios I'm out there and I say, geez, I haven't done that in a while, and it works. So always keep an open mind and always be able to reach in your bag of tricks and learn from your mistakes.
That's great advice, man. And I will keep that with me, and I'll make sure above anything else, I'm having a good time. That's what it's all about. So
that's it. No doubt.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, man. I appreciate you. Mark, thanks for the help with this. I appreciate the turkey hunting gods blessing me with some of this knowledge. I hope you guys learned something at home. I think I know you did. And I appreciate you tuning into the Turkey Hunter OG series on Working Class on DeerCast. Thanks for being here. And Mark, I normally say go shoot a giant on this series. Go shoot a giant beard. How's that?
Yeah, go shoot a strutter, or go shoot a long beard, something like that.
Go shoot a giant long beard.
Yeah.
We'll close her there. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.